Turn the camera. Yana to next to cut you on. That was happened to change. The dekat in verb cheat sheet ya test again I questionnaire. The shukwa I college day khogu was ket talk kanakshu yeah astronomy ye do up. We itikatu Atatiwa Haina Kawani. Yeah, take 8.5 by 11 kuku aya. Stikat Nituasagu Kish Hiti Yakeha with final exam. About Stikat Yakuku aya Konachaya. Kahushki Kahushkit. Kachshikit Yakuku Kach Yata Yachtu Yeguding Akoa Data Ya Agachtu Saat Yahan Kakashkau Bushkashni Yachtosu Kadin Kadina Ya Yantisqueen Yatlingit grammar Ya Ayachati Kagachtu Kash. That's the Tlingit Linguistics. Atruya was a good take his son a yaha to Taya a couple jays. It's the Katasin. Hosakushitzi ya Achawi Aak'waatseen Ho'owe Aak'waatseen Aak'waatseen was the Shkate Khanakawani Aya Hashif Ohas Ini Hasu on Yuhan Yach Aya Tlingit Linguistics Ya Atasqueen Tau Hini Tunach Aya Adyachati Yahin Tau away Yuhan Shitsin Aka Stikat Ya at the screen ki a day ayas it was a good Kadin ayayi ach Yigoayach one Yigoayach one You take a thing a day ya you had Panach away in the time. The joy has the hand Yakanakch Ha at the school. The cat has a dusa. Kadina Shiguka you had. It has Chayego gang Aya Hosaku. Kart was a good the cat. Achjibu Ejit cut with jail. Yeah, the cat you hung Yakan Yakoiki Aya. Yeah, Kathy Redley. It's a Aak'waatseen. Ye do you Hatangia Yach. Cheesh. Good guest. Very happy to invite Kathy Reddy watched the video. She was in the video with Cyril. We're going to keep going through that story. Do you want to just tell us who you are?
My name is Kathy Reddy. I know lots of you, I guess. I'm an attorney in Juneau on sabbatical, and honored to be a friend of Cyril George for many, many years, and email buddy, and miss him a lot. He would be 92 day after tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so after Lance invited me to the class, I went back and read all my Aak'waatseen, And I have that Swanton book for you. Sorry, I didn't get it back to you. So I'm very pleased to be able to come and join you all tonight.
Great. I'm going to give a quick around the room introduction. This will include some folks who are online with us. So we'll start.
Will you had to suck a Aak'waatseen disagree?
Dus you had to suck, Richard Bradford, the Ka
And the team you could do a song, second should be could do a song. Get to teams could do a song. Valerie Aak'waatseen.
إذا يخطوز هذا يخطوز كاستين يخطوز جل يخطوز لكا خينا
Hasana. Good to see you. Sheesh, Goody.
Kenyoke, Yuchadowasok, Louise, Mason, English King, Shileli Yachteket, Ayachet.
Ye does it seem ye cut do a song. Lee Hall.
يخاكو يخطو الساق خيناخ شام
Aak'waatseen you had to suck the Aak'waatseen Mike. Sheesh, okay,
Kasanki lechet du sag, lekachenach and Williams you sag.
Okay. And let's go White Horse, Sitka, Fairbanks. Yipaha. Oh, I don't hear anything. It sounds like it wants to make noise, but it's not really doing it.
Kadanja, you had to a sound, Tlingit Lake Matt, Shikak Ye
Okay. Fairbanks?
You had to yourself. I'm a master's student.
Okay. Ankij. Etsuga. Maybe just listening. Okay. Chish. Konea Aak'waatseen. Konachawea Sakhan Kan. Chish Hatiku. Can you tell us your Tlingit name?
Shteatin, Deshitan, Steelhouse.
Oh, there, and on the phone, of course. Yoke. Oh. Echa. Lekakhenaksa. Ku'a. Sheesh. Okay. He's got a good nickname now. Okay. Any questions from anybody before we go? Okay. So I wanted to make a cheat sheet, and it came out much longer than I thought. And I was like, it's time to go to class. Okay. We're going to walk through this thing. When I first heard about the concepts of cheat sheets, I had an astronomy teacher who said, you can use as much as you can fit onto a piece of paper. And ever since then, I've been trying to fit as much as possible onto a piece of paper, which is what happened here. But this is trying to extract some things from the Crippen Verbal Structure Handbook, which is excellent. But the idea is we're going to take things out of there in chunks so we can learn how to use that document a little bit more efficiently. It's a fantastic, fantastic resource, as well as Eggleston's 575 Tlingit verbs, both the dissertation, the verb paradigm dissertation, and also the website on Gold Belt Heritage Foundation. Does everybody have one of these? Yeah, right up there. Let's take the walk of shame. That was late as well. Those of you online, I sent it moments before class, which I'm sure does not work for you. Shakurish, Katuish. But we'll try to go faster with this stuff. But we'll see. But what we're doing here is this handout, and of course there's no pages, no page numbers or title or anything. It'll get better as we go along. But page 1 starts, the top left, it says determiners. Now this is mirroring what the Crippen Handbook does. The Crippen Handbook basically, if you were to think of a verb going from left to right, and verbal phrases and Tlingit grammar, the first things you encounter are on the first pages up to the last things you encounter. So you work your way through basically what you might see in Tlingit grammar. So this is doing the same thing. So working through here, you guys should be able to spot all of this stuff within the next couple of weeks. So what we're going to do with Aak'waatseen, and I sent a handout last night, maybe, night before, with a certain thing that you guys are supposed to see what you can do with. And we'll pick it up maybe next week sometime. I want to try and continue working through this story. If we hit snags, we hit things that we're just not sure about, we'll take our best guess and move along, and I'll try and ask a fluent speaker about it as well. There may be things that we're encountering that we're not able to completely decipher, which is just going to happen. But moving through this worksheet, we start with determiners, and they really determine where things are in relation to the speaker. I'm going to grab a pen because I'm going to need to make notes on how I can make changes. And really this is designed for all of us, so if you think of a better way or something that could be done differently, let me know, and I'll try and make those changes. But there should be, I'm going to make a thicker line between the first 4, ya, he, we, and yu, and the one underneath it, which is ha. Why are those different? There's 4 of them. Ya, he, we, yu, and then a 5th. Ha.
You're talking about you as a person and where things are in relation to you.
Absolutely. So the first 4 talk about you as where things are in relation to the speaker. Ya is right here. He is here. We is over there. You is way over there. Ha is a little bit different because it's like where things are in relation to us as a group, whatever the group is, right? So we said there's the ha right there, right, along with the suffix t. So then we get into noun suffixes. Oh, yell if you have any questions. I'm trying to move through this stuff kind of fast. so we can get to the story. Now we got noun suffixes. There are a few of these that are related to motion verbs. So when we've been talking about motion verbs, we've been saying, well, they're kind of different, blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to start saying more. Motion verbs are different because they can have any of the 4 conjugation prefixes, but it's all determined by what's in the prefix. Right? So before the verb, you're going to have something that talks about what type of motion it is. And that, depending on what type of motion it is, that's the kind of conjugation prefix you're going to have. So on the right-hand side, CNJ, and that's telling you what conjugation prefix that particular verb would take. And this is why we say haku, and then we'd say hundakahitite naku. Those are the same verbs, but they have a different, slightly different because they change conjugation prefix on us. So it's the same verb root, but it's a different conjugation. Okay. So we have CH, which is an ergative marker. It marks the subject and a transitive verb. The other thing we should note about the CH marker is if it pops up and it marks who the subject is, and we have one of those verbs where we say 3 on 3 and you switch to the A switches back to the 0. Okay? If you have the ergative marker. That's just the way it goes. That one. That's to be at or on it. Oops, there's no commas. At, comma, on, comma, in, comma. But I don't know where my commas are. Neither of those have anything to do with motion. They have to do with being located somewhere. Or that one has to do with being located somewhere. The T, arriving at. This creates the 0 conjugation verb. Right? That's why I would say hot iya good. Right? And then we could say hot iya good, or we could say way day ye good. So that's why the verb takes a different shape, iya good, as opposed to ye good. We're going to take a look at these a little bit later in the semester when we're taking a closer look at motion verbs. To move repeatedly somewhere, to move around somewhere, or to go repeatedly to a certain place. Also a 0 conjugation motion verb. Day, which is towards. Dach, from. Nak is leaving something behind. Nach is through or along. Pa is around or about. All of those are not conjugation when it comes to motion verbs. N is with or using, soon as. Is the verbless locative phrase. So it's saying, ne she's at home. Ya duchat, I'm right here. Gusu wa'eh. All of those are using that you. But there's not a verb in those phrases. Right? So you wouldn't say, Gusu yanikut. It doesn't make sense in Tlingit. Gudei sa yanikut. So you would use a prefix or use a suffix that's associated with motion. The U is not associated with motion. And as far as all of these suffixes, how does tone work with suffixes?
Is it that long and low? And
So that's with the stem variation. That's what we were doing the other day. So yeah, that's within the verb. But with suffixes, there's a rule with all suffixes. All of them. How's it go?
What's
going on?
Opposite? Is it the opposite of what the tone is before?
Yeah, so if it's open, if it's an open suffix, it's the opposite. Right? So, and when we talk about suffixes, open means that it either begins or ends with a vowel. If it begins and ends with a consonant, that's a closed suffix, it will always be hot. Otherwise, it's always opposite of whatever the vowel is before. Okay? You good? So that's dealing with nouns. The next thing you might see after nouns are relational bases. Here's a list of some very common ones. So you can look them up right here. These are ones you should really have a handle on. by the end of the semester at least, you should be able to spot these anywhere you hear. You should be able to use quite a few. And so this is a little cheat sheet for you when we're going through this speech and trying to figure out the different things that are. Postpositional pronouns. So now we start getting into the verb. So when we're getting into the verb, the root is 0. Everything to the left of the root is plus. Everything to the right of the root is minus. And we're going up one spot at a time. So we've been talking about these thematic prefixes, some of these other things. So now we're going to, oops, I haven't been scrolling my little screen. So we went down here, relational bases. Now we're over here to these postpositional pronouns. Can anybody give me an example of a postpositional pronoun? Yes. Anybody else? Khan Kananik. And it's a command. Yay. So there's, yeah, you can say, right? He came next to me. So this is the empty base. We'll keep an eye out for this. We'll learn how to use it more. It's in a lot of the verbs for telling people, telling things. I told y'all about it. Why don't you know? And so we're going to learn. We'll spot, right? They're a little bit tricky. We'll spot. So after that comes preverbs. Same thing. So there's a big list of them. We've probably seen some of them. Neich, so that's why you'd say neichgu, right? And neichli degnaku. So those are different. One's a noun, one's a preverb. And these, we'll get into more detail about how these work. These are just some that you might see, you might encounter. So here's a list of them. They're going to pop up shortly before the verb. They'll be probably more popular in motion verbs than other types of verbs. But there's a list of them, and these were sort of the ones that I felt were the most common or the ones that are most beneficial to know how to use. And again, right in the center, we've got the conjugation. So that's telling you if it's involved with a motion verb, that's the conjugation prefix it's going to take. Right? So if you're telling someone to go up the stairs, keiku. Right? It's not nagu, it's keiku. Go up. Flip the page. Now we get to the object pronouns. These are the most common ones. We're not dealing with ush yet. And a couple of the other ones. We'll get to those when we got some examples and other stuff. These are the ones that you should know these ones by now. At least you should be able to spot them, look them up on this chart. You should have a pretty good idea of what you're looking at when you see them. Now, we haven't really gotten into the details of thematic prefixes, which is what I was doing really good with this little cheat sheet. And I was like, well, we should sort of open this door. So what we're doing is we're looking at these little parts, right? There's this slot, there's this slot, there's this slot. As far as verbal structure goes. And then, so we're here to thematic prefixes. This is going down in 2 columns. Just go all the way down the column, go to the next column. So the thematic prefixes, so there's this area of prefixes that we can take a look at. And then there's sort of slots within that main sort of thing. But they all sort of fall under this general umbrella. They change the theme of the verb, the way the verb functions. So in here, though, we have a number of them that they're just identical. It's just, you just learn how to spot which ones they could be. So is the aerial, it's relating to a space, like in kudziti, kusti. those are aerial prefixes. It might be the same as the weather one. I don't really know. I usually keep weather as a separate one, just because. But they sound identical. There's another identical one, which is ko, as in people, right? So you could say ku'u, the people who live there, the people, kusacha, eating people, right? Kuwajaki, the killer of people. Kusachan, there's a good one. Love of people. Animalism, murder, love. Okay, yeah. But this ko has to do with the space. Yeah.
How do you know when to use that? Like, is there a rule about which verbs can take a theme and which ones don't?
They're built into the verb. Okay. They're built in. So some of these themes, when we talk about thematic prefixes, they're usually built into that particular verb. So you can take a verb. So some of the ways we've talked about changing a verb is you've got the root, then you can change the classifier. Now you can add thematic prefixes, and this is how you're creating new verbs, right? And so it might have the similar meaning, but it's different. And part of it could be the way that it's, so there's a verb for carrying people, for dragging things, then there's a verb for dragging things by the handle, and then we've also gotten into how verbs are classifying all the time, round objects, and things like that. So it's sometimes, if it's a carrying verb, it's going to utilize these. But they're built into the verb. They're sort of prescribed. I'm sure once we got good enough, we could probably make new verbs. So if we had a verb for doing something, and then we needed one for doing something specifically for something round, like a ball. So there's 3 k prefixes. There's also 3 k prefixes. And we just sort of get to know which one is which. I don't know how, but so there's k as in comparing two things. Ye kuge, it's this big, or there's that many. It's not used really that often. Sometimes you can have 2 of them. You could have kakasatag for 2 things like pliers to come and bite together and hold something. And then we get into the next slot within this slot where we're getting into these incorporated nouns. And these are usually kind of body part type things. J is the hand, tu is inside, sa or se has to do with the voice. And it's from a body part, which is right here. This is your sa. And that's where the word sate comes from for necklace, sadat eye for scarf, sakaat for a bib. Sh is a nose or a point, da is a round, ka or khe is a mouth or an opening, ka is also, although ka and ka are slightly different, but I'm not exactly sure how. Sha is the head, sh is the end of something. A is that's a thematic verb. So we're used to seeing the A sometimes when we've got the third person object and the third person subject, but there are a few verbs that are athematic, and the A is always there. Think of it. Sheikh, dancing, it's always there. A tune, a steak. It's just built into it. And it doesn't, I don't know if it really means anything. It's just sort of built into the verb. It sits where the object pronoun should be. K is weather. There's another one. And then going over, we've got some surface ones, and this is where it gets a little sneaky. There's K, which is round, and there's K, which is a horizontal surface. There's unfortunately no way to tell which one is which, but I think these are in the same spot, because you can only have one or the other. But of course, they sound exactly the same. It usually makes sense with the verb which one it is. If it's specifically talking about carrying round objects, then it's probably the round. Flat and round, like what? Like a pizza? There you go. And it's flat. Because if it's round, that means it's spherical. It's spherical. That's what I mean by round. How about like spherical? Let's just change that right now.
sphere?
Yeah,
Add to that?
yeah. Never down again. Like a berry, a ball.
Mhm.
It always has to do with round, specifically not spherical things. There's stuff around. Solve it. Quatyachati. There's a story an elder told me. I tried to tell it, nobody laughed. Where Raven and Coyote were arguing about where the world was flat or round. So Raven's like, "Well, I'll be right back." And he takes off and comes back. Quatyachati. Flew around the world. It's like an ape. And then we've got ya, which is the vertical surface or the face. So those are thematic prefixes. They will contract. They're less likely to contract, though, than the next group, which are the contracting prefixes. Do you have one? Take the walk of shame. So this is where paying attention to where the conjugation prefix goes matters. And this is going to matter as far as deciphering really complicated words. So we've got, the first thing we run into is ga conjugation. Wait, am I not? I need a designated scroll. Or somebody say scroll. There's a verb for scroll. Okay. So the first one we're going to run into is ga conjugation. Right, so that sits there, and looking at our verb theme, this does matter when we start getting into aerialis especially. So it goes ga in one slot, next slot over, aerialis. The aerialis is used for what? Negative. Anything else? What does it do? It tells us the verb has not occurred. The verb has not occurred, the aerialis pops in, and that specifically means the verb has not occurred. So it appears in a lot of different forms, all future forms, because the verb hasn't happened. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but it just means it hasn't happened. All negative forms. The perfective, if the perfective is there, the perfective will usually just keep the aerialis from coming in. It just stays in. Then we've got inner conjugation. This is where the conjugation, so the first one, the ga, that's a conjugation prefix. Here's three more, 0, qa, and na. There's another thing here, which we might call na mode or na conjugation. I think na conjugation is what it's been settled on. But it's sort of like qa mode, where it turns on, and it doesn't matter what conjugation prefix is, it's just going to pop up. And that's in progressive imperfective form. Yanagut, yanasqueen, yanasqueen. Right, so all of those are going to have it, even though, so to wipe something, we know quena as a towel. So you could say, yanasqueen, he's wiping it right now. But if I was going to command you to do it, that reveals what the conjugation prefix is. Qashqu. It also shows you that the root is not queen. So and we'll talk later about why the root changes shape. Then we get into perfective in qa mode. So here, and they share, if they're in the same list, they share the same space, so they can only be one of them. So there's the perfective, and the qa mode turns on for certain things, future mode, hortative, and attributive and conditional ones. Then we get into the subject pronouns. So here's where the subject pronouns live. We're getting closer to the root. Next to the subject pronouns, we get the classifier. Here's our classifier chart. So now you say, I didn't have that chart for me. You got it right now. Boom. What now? Huh? Oh, thank you. That wasn't quite fast enough, though. Sorry, everybody online. This thing is it's on Tlingit.info under Tlingit Linguistics now, the verb cheat sheet. Then we get into stem variations. So here you can look it up. Short and high, short and high, short and high, long and high, long and high, long and low, long. you'll realize if it has a pinched ending, it cannot be, well, it won't be. There's a few suffixes here I'm going to add to that. Then there's a couple of verb auxiliaries that sometimes we need. This is the last time I have to do it. Okay. Well, actually, it's not. That's it. There's the handout. Now you know. Now you got it. Perfect. All makes sense. Commit all of this, burn it into, I don't know how you feed that into your brains, but just know. Go for it. Any questions?
We're gonna have a test.
Yeah, we'll have a test sometime on this. I'll just hand it to you and it'll be blank, different areas. And we'll also, but the big thing is we're going to use this so that you can spot these things. Right? So now we're going to go back into the story. And we'll take some time with these sentences. We'll take a look at them. Because there's a lot of people who can go out there and read the translations, but what's really going on with the grammar? And why are these different speakers so amazing? We'll see why. There's a lot of people, this is the difference between talking like little kids and talking like adults. You want to eventually make that leap. The Downhowers used to write about this. They said, you think Tlingit will survive, but no one's going to be able to talk like they used to. And it's a challenge, And so when I was filming Dick and Nora this summer, at one point Nora would just get really emotional. And then she came out and she said, there's nobody who can talk to me like that anymore. And it was an eye-opening experience. That makes me want to dive more into this and figure out, how do I unlock it? So we're trying to come up with all these decoder keys and other things so we can start to think. And it's so fun just how crazy the verbs can get and how complicated it can be. This shows you, and this is just taking little pieces out of Zeus. When you've got that whole thing, and then there's even more beyond that. But at least this gets us to a pretty comfortable starting place to say this is the stuff we should know pretty well within the next month or so. We got some time. We good? Questions? Anybody? Everybody with? Everybody okay? Everybody good? Is that what I said? Everybody good. Get into the clap mode right now. Okay, so get back here. Where did we leave off? Where did we leave off on this?
Salmon in the water.
What's that? Conveniently, I have no numbers. 1, 2. Okay. So we got a translation on the right. We have the lines. So what I would like to do is to have you read up to the period, and then we'll come back and you can identify for me all the parts that are there. So do you have an extra copy of this? No, probably not.
We can share.
All right. So first of all, just to warm us up, anybody want to just read those first two sentences? We don't have to do the work for them. Got to read.
Starting where though?
So those first two sentences of the story.
Oh.
I could. Hasingit ade ha'i at distu ye which yawudane which is khan tashtakat at ayak wahaya qakudzati ha'i at distu. And we didn't do this next line, right?
Okay.
Okay. Who wants to go first?
Just breaking it down, all of it?
Yeah, so what we'll do is you'll read the sentence, and then you'll come back and just tell me anything that you recognize. anything you think you're seeing. And then once you've had a chance to give us everything, and especially like where's the verb, when we get to the verb, what do you see in the verb? I'm especially interested in any sort of prefixes that you see, classifier, what mode it's in, and then what's the stem variation. Just for us to sort of start taking notes and paying attention to those. Okay.
Hin tanach da du adi a kruz hastu yakwa bu kruziti aha yach. Identify the verbs. Kruziti. The root is T, to exist. The classifier is the, which is that plus D?
Yes, oops, I didn't put that on.
Plus D, S group plus I. Is cook part of the thematic prefix? People.
Area. Stem variation.
Long and low.
Okay, good. All right. Anything else that you recognize in here? Any directional, relational things going on?
Dark food adi. Inland. And then the verb stem ought. Right?
Yes.
Would be,
Yep. What is that root? Or root? What is the root mean?
to walk.
Or a lot is to walk.
And the stem is long and low. Is it zero classifier?
Yep.
And the def is summer?
Yep.
I don't know what the W in front of the def is.
Anybody?
Future?
Perfect. And what's the at the end?
I'm not sure.
So. We see it in kita, kasha, the one or the ones. In this case, it would be the ones because there's a plural verb. So the ones who were walking inland or walking around on the inland, specifically not on the water, because before we got water. So hin tanach.
Nach would be through. So another time.
Let's see. Let's see that right there. Okay, so sorry, I just realized that there were some questions here. Tanach would be through like a body of water. I think, yeah, it's related to taknach. Tak is the bottom of the cavity. Taknach, I think. Tanach. So tanach is through a body of water. Good.
Like a salmon, like in through the water.
Yeah. So you're definitely in the water, not like just moving along the water. Because you could say hin kanach, and that would be like a boat. Or if there was like a porpoise or something, maybe that was going along the top of the water. So kanach, tanach would be through inside the water. Okay. Good. Okay. And then there's one more relational base thing going on down the last part of the sentence. Yuck. Yuck. Okay, excellent. Let's see. Yeah, the ones we do.
So the forest, why is the forest?
So
There's deserts in there.
yeah, I guess you could say the ones who wander on the inland, because it's what he's doing here is he's specifically saying the things in the water, the fish in the water, things that aren't in the water. So he's doing this contrasting thing. But as far as the translation, you could certainly say the ones who roam on the inland. That's probably be more accurate. Don't crash. I'm not going to change it. Someone could make a note. And it's become unreliable. Okay. Becca?
Today is the root.
Mm-hmm.
And ka, is that another root?
Yep.
And is sub a classifier?
Yep.
And is that minus D S group minus I?
Yep.
Is it ka plus the suffix, or is that a separate?
I'd have to listen to that part. That X on there is probably something to do with like multiple people, or maybe it's coming from them.
Is it a yet classifier on the second verb?
Looks like 0. And that would be the subject marker right there. Anything else you can spot? Or what about the stem variation for those two verbs?
Oh, it's long and I and long and low.
I think ya is that verb, I believe, is. Let me pull this up real quick. So when we look in the we find this verb. So we can see it here in the verb theme, and ya, s, 0, nay. So this is showing us the root. Ga is the conjugation prefix. The A before is telling us that it's athematic. The U, this right here, is the vertical surface, and this is telling us that, and some of them have a perfective or an arealis just built into the verb. It has to always be there. There are certain verbs that are like that.
Why?
I don't know. That's a good question. Why?
Sounds like focus of a dissertation.
Yeah, why are certain verbs? So I'll pull some out that have the Arialis built into them. Because that's not a negative form. That's not, and so, but it could be that the root, this root may, has to do with, it's probably the same verb root as to just generically do something. Like, wasa'atune, how did that happen? Ye jechane, I'm working. Ye adane, somebody's doing that. So it's this very generic do type of verb. And so it could have something to do with that. I'll ask. Well, it has to do with respect. That has to do with respect. Yeah. So maybe there's certain things that aren't done. And that's what respect means. I don't know. It's a good question. I guess. Oops, that one. Okay.
Aya Iden Hashkatini Ayu today Kwasaya Hasu Ine June. Something at the verbs.
What's that?
Did I pick the verbs after and stuff?
Yeah. And there's only. Well, go ahead.
Is it two?
There's one that's a noun made from a verb. And then there's, yeah. So when you say hashkashniki, that's a verb, that's a noun, right? Does that make sense? Did that come out?
Kind of. Does.
So shkashnik is a noun, it means a story.
Yeah.
Right. What was that so funny? What?
So it's a verb, it's a noun, and now I'm very confused.
You said it was both.
Oh, okay. Oops.
Okay.
It's a noun that is made from a verb.
So do you treat it like a verb, or do you treat it
I would treat it like a noun.
Kashniki is about as a noun?
Yeah, because it can be possessed, right?
Okay.
So you could say shkashni, and when it's just, because you could say like in shkakwashni, I'm gonna tell you a story. So it conjugates like a verb, but shkashni on its own is a noun, and in this case, it's a noun.
So is there two verbs and one noun verb, or is there just one verb?
There's one verb and only one verb.
Okay.
Two.
Is it like to tell? That's the verb?
No.
No. So is it June?
Yeah.
June.
Ye jiwune ye.
So is ne the root,
Yes.
and it's long and low,
Mm-hmm.
and then what else? Is there no classifier?
It's a zero.
So zero.
There's always a class.
It's the zero classifier.
Yes.
And then is G like a, is that J?
Yep.
So it's a inalienable incorporated noun.
Yeah, it has to do with hands or possession. So, yejene would be the verb, right? Do we know a yejene? Familiar with that verb? To work. To work. Okay, anything else that you recognize there? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4 of these directional type things that we've been kind of looking at?
Is it the like ayah?
Well, wasaya, it's like how. But then there's a couple of like relational base type things. There's,
Dig, to dig.
yeah. So we've got Aak'waatseen. How would we translate that? Aak'waatseen. What's who? Huh? Among. And then what's something? What's
The one.
The ones. The ones among it. The ones among it. So so you can say some of them. That's a good translation. How ide. What kind of thing is that?
Ide is the postpositional.
Okay. Two people going towards people. Ashkashniki ayak today. It's today.
To the inside.
Going inside. Okay. Hastu'in. There. Hastu'in. With them. With them. Aak'waatseen ide hashkashniki ayak today. Wasaya hastu'in yeji. So it's also the way that they worked. The way that they did things.
I just had a question.
Okay.
In that last sentence, it seems like primary verb is just implied and not actually there.
Yeah. So there's no. So a lot of times, what we're going to find with Tlingit as well, especially when we get into stories, and we're starting to talk about some different things, and then there's not a very specific sort of subject or anything in here. It's just sort of there's a lot of implied meaning. So a lot of times, so he says, among them, it's told through our stories how people would work, how people would do things, right? So again, and so hastu'in yeji bunei. So the hastu'in is usually with some of those people. So it's really interesting the way Tlingit does this sometimes. It goes into this really ambiguous mode as far as who's specifically doing what. And especially you find this near the beginning of stories, so that the storyteller will do some of these sort of circular type of reference things and not really talking about anybody specific, but then we'll move right into a story. And it's pretty common, I think, in Tlingit that you get this, and then you also get this in speeches as well. The way that things are done, the way that people do things. And they'll refer to these types of things because they're really big concepts, right? So we're getting a really big concept and we know the fundamentals of the story. A lot of times, what he's really sort of getting at is that through our stories, we don't forget the way that things are supposed to be, because then we're going to get a story. And it's really classic Tlingit oratory, because they'll also say, and what was going to happen, or what happened? How did this happen? Right? And they'll be asking these sort of questions or making these really interesting, almost like super vague statements because it's going to be answered and clarified by the story. And that's really the way it functions. And that's why storytelling is a different mode of speaking Tlingit, where you do have sometimes riddles, or parables, or other things like that, where there's the stuff where it's, you know, sort of like when we're asking Nora about the one-horned goat story. We're like, why is it called the one-horned goat? And she's like, because there's a one-horned goat. And she got kind of upset. And we're like, but it's not in the story. And she says, there's a one-horned goat. And that's all. And we're just like, okay, we'll figure it out. But it's because this is the way that Tlingit functions too. It'll do some things like this, where if you're trying to just do this literal translation, you know, and so you got to find that space in between, because by doing that, you figure out what this communication is really doing.
So does when the ye jineye becomes the ye jibuneye, is that because it's talking about multiple people and it's perfective? Or?
It's perfective, but it's really just one person.
Okay.
And so you might expect like a yejidune. You might expect something like that in there too. The way that people work, the way that people do things. But in this case, you get a lot of that too, where the third person pronoun can just substitute for things like that. And sometimes what will happen, like if you're telling a story in English, you're like, oh, and then he did this, and you're always reminding people who's doing things. But in Tlingit and in a lot of native languages, it just sticks with the pronouns. It's like you can figure it out. There's a main character, and he's the one who's usually doing stuff. But we haven't gotten to the story yet. So he's still sort of in setup mode, getting us to the story.
Yeah, that's good. I have Aak'waatseen. Is that one of the determiners?
Yeah. There's that's this boy, this Aak'waatseen. And we can like sort of break down the name for it. If you don't want. Might as well. Let's take them to pieces. There's three things in that name. They're different things. One of them, huh?
They're all awesome.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they just get better as you go on. Up. The noun. It's a modified noun. Guess what the verb is? Seen. And then what happens with tot is the K falls off. Talk. Okay, again. It means to be alive.
Something I rather enjoy.
Alive in the lake. In the little lake.
Disagree with Thornton's translation.
What's that?
I kind of disagree with Thornton's interpretation of it, though. I don't think that name comes from the story necessarily. I think it's connected to the story, but the way it was described to me is it refers to a frog that freezes in a lake.
That's what I heard as well.
So that makes a lot of sense, I think, considering the linguistic interpretation as well.
Yeah, like it's still alive, right? And that verb, you said kuste, for it to exist, and that's used a lot. Yet seen is used to usually refer to the fact that it's still living. It's usually how I've seen it, right? So, still going? Good job.
And this was in the Eddie.
What was that?
This was in the Eddie.
Yeah.
On the lake.
Yeah. Well.
I've heard it was the little lake. Yeah. I've heard it was the little lake. Alive, like it's alive in the little lake.
Yeah.
And I've heard the frog as well. Since it's your guys' name, I'll just go ahead and go with that. I've heard of people who've like told elders that they. I don't know. Okay. Huh?
That sounds like that's about to get fun.
Oh, well, someone said, okay, this is, don't make the tragic mistake of telling people who are fluent speakers how they should be saying their own name. Just don't do that. Because they might break your tape recorder. Okay.
Okay, I'll remember that. Okay. At gaan ani, ach ayachas at gaan du sla du ish.
So, what have we got? Change the thing.
The verb has to be at gaan.
Uh-huh.
Long and high.
Well, it's long, but there's no tone marker, so it's low. Long and low.
But the second time is high.
Oh, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, that's the top one. Good job. My bad. Because that one's the verb. The top one is a noun. It's turned into basically an adjective. And this verb is not in the verb dictionary. Does anybody know what it means?
Something smoking.
Yeah, it has to do with like smoking fish. Right? I think this is the verb for smoking fish. It's not documented, but we see it being used here as a verb. Because if you go to like Aak'waatseen, when they built a community smokehouse, it's called Aak'waatseen. That's what you call a smokehouse, Aak'waatseen. And I could never figure out why it was on, because I thought maybe it would be on or something like that, because you couldn't find the verb anymore. When you see a speaker who's using the verb, has on, right? But is it athematic? I'm guessing it's athematic.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not be, because they could be smoking the third person thing. And there's a verb for like smoking cigarettes, there's a verb for smoking meat, and I think this is the verb specifically for smoking fish, I believe. Or it could have to do with preparing fish, I don't know. We'll have to get the Tlingit verb document and team on it. Okay. Yeah, that's it there. There's nothing, that's the verb, okay. Right.
What is Suffix?
Yeah.
Okay. That's confusing. Hine Qada Aya Ashkushiyat Aak'waatseen. Ashkushiyat is later, right?
Yep.
The verb. So yet would be the root.
Yep.
Short and low.
Short and high.
Or short and high. Meal, salmon.
About that keenet.
I'm guessing that's the trap. I see food for water. I've never seen that word.
Right. So we got qada. Check the screen. So the other thing, keenet would be to be located. It's located in the water. Hini would be in the water. So in the water they're doing this. That's where they're trapping the fish. The T part would mean it has been dropped in there, so it's in there. And then you've got Aya, Ashkushiyat. I think there's another one with the Urialis built. So what's the part?
So it's like bad thing specifically, or?
So that one, when it's high toned and it tends to come in that preverb area instead of after it, it usually means there. And it's a really interesting one because if you put a suffix on it, it's going to stay. Huh?
So with the exception of the Y and I 7 A's in a row.
Oh.
Do you expand? I don't know. It's just.
Oh yeah.
It's like it seems like it's going really fast.
A is the default verb in Tlingit. You can get a lot of them. This is the case we do actually have a whole bunch of them. But the double A that's high tone, when you put a suffix on it, it goes short, but it stays high. That's why you say Aak'waatseen. Away. It's the same one, right? But when you put other, well, I'm just gonna stop there. And then kushet, kushet is a really interesting verb. You can pull that verb root out, and it means child. And it's the only kinship term that gets a possessive pronoun. It's weird. Yeti.
Where is it again?
Yet.
Yet. Where's the child in this?
Yet.
Yet?
And you say yeti. So it's really interesting. So it's saying like, let's be children.
So did they really relate this word to playing as relating to children that play?
Well, it's sort of being childlike, I guess is how you could look at it. But this specific verb, it means to play by running around, right? So it's not sitting in, pusuk is the verb for sitting there and playing. This is the verb, basketball, tag, run around, stomping on the fish trap like a naughty boy, things like that. So it's an active play, and that's why it's yet. The ush is usually means that guy or that girl. So the context, it's a pronoun we haven't used very much, but if you're telling a story, it's the one we've been talking about. It's the main character. It's this dude or this gal. But it's built into this verb, which is kind of weird. I don't remember why.
Are they referring to Aak'waatseen in this case?
Yes. So there's a trap in the Salmon River. He was playing there. Aak'waatseen.
Aak'waatseen. Aak'waatseen. Team is the verb.
Mm-hmm.
Sit is the classifier.
Yep.
Plus I. The W, that's protected.
Yep.
Of the I at the end, does that mean it's short?
The I at the end, Aak'waatseen.
Isn't that a suffix?
Yeah, so what that's doing is it's making it relational.
Oh.
Right. So what it's doing is it's tying itself to the next verb. And there's a couple, I'll have to listen to it because it's probably going to be Aak'waatseen. It's probably going to be Aak'waatseen. And the other thing that's going on is when the one that gets the suffix on it like that is usually the one that's linked to the other one. And so what's the other verb?
The time.
Mm-hmm. In this way.
So is that a related, like, if that's one of the hand intending verbs?
Yes.
Sata.
Right. And so it's a positional verb in this form, and it's for something to be laying somewhere. And it's usually I mean, if you look in your verb dictionary, there's a whole bunch. But it's a positional verb, and it means to be laying somewhere, to be lying somewhere. Okay, lying. Okay, and then ut would be there. So it's A, two A's, and T for different cases.
Yeah, that's on and one.
Okay. Yeah, nashu one.
And one would be the verb.
What's that?
Nashu one is verb.
Yeah, and it's probably this.
Noun verb to me.
And I'd have to listen to it because it's probably that. That would be my guess. So yeah, one would be the root, and there's certain roots that you can pull out that are nouns. Like yea, you know that one, to pretend or to lie. Yut is a child, it's to play. Wound is maggots. So for something to be maggoty, gets an L classifier. A lot of times the L classifier works to say something it has that quality. Like you could say, if somebody put a hoodie on and it had these little ears, you call it kekuk, like it's eared, kekuk. It has these ears. And so it has an interesting sort of use like that. And so this one, you've got the ya. My guess is that the na is the na conjugation that's pop up, not the conjugation prefix. Would make sense that it would have a short and high root, the stem variation, and that's telling us that this is in the progressive imperfective mode. Like it was at that time, it was getting maggot.
Progressive, you said imperfective?
Yes. Sort of like yanagut, yanasqueen, yanasqueen. Okay, I think we have time for one more.
Not so positive on that.
On what?
Having enough time for one more.
Oh, okay. Oh, we are kind of out of time. We'll do one more.
Yeah.
Stole your line.
I didn't know I was skilled at ventriloquism, but learn things every day. Should I just identify parts now?
No, you should read it.
Okay. The woo is perfective.
Mm-hmm.
Hick, to run. The G is plus D plus I.
SH group?
Yes.
Yeah.
And shorten I.
Yep. And what's the ut?
It. Towards it.
There, at that place. So we'll get to these motion verbs more, but when we've got ut at the front of a motion verb, that usually means to just do that motion around. It's usually saying not necessarily a direction. So in this case, he's running around. And if he said Aak'waatseen, he was walking around. All right, that went. The time went fast. Story was slow. We'll be done with this thing by March. Keep looking at this thing. Look ahead. I'll take another look at this story as well. Keep tweaking it. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing storytelling. There's lots of stuff to unpack here. And so Tuesday we'll get a chance to put some stuff together as well. So we'll do some more sentence stuff before we get started back into unpacking the verbs. We never got to our online folks today. Cheese, Kukatuhan, Chakulish, Chiku, Katanja, Cheese. Let's see. Yeah, on. On is a different verb than on. And so on might have to do with drying fish. Caught the fish that were located in the stream by the trap. This is playing with them by the trap. It's probably playing with the fish. But let me look at that more. That's probably Aak'waatseen means that's the place where they were trapped. That's probably caught would be what they were catching. Hini in the water. Aak'waatseen.
If you look downtown,
They were trapped. They're probably turners. I'll check it out though. Cheese.
join. All levels are welcome. There's